Let's go to Azaz in northern Syria now, where we're joined by TRT World journalist Obaida Hitto. He's been in Idlib covering the latest offensive. Good to talk to you, Obaida. So, the regime and the Russians unilaterally declared a ceasefire, but is it fully holding?
The ceasefire was reported overnight on Friday into Saturday morning. But by Saturday night, even though the airstrikes had slowed down, it was clear that the ceasefire wasn't going to hold. The opposition responded to the request for a ceasefire, saying that the regime and Russia should pull out of places that they had taken during the most recent escalation, including a major city called Qal'at al-Madiq and Kafar al-Buda and surrounding areas. But the regime in Russia didn't do that. And then into Saturday night and then all day Sunday, all the way up until last night, there have been ongoing airstrikes and aerial bombardment on different parts of southern Idlib and northern Hama. Kafar al-Buda was the focal point of that bombardment overnight. More than 8 different airstrikes attacked that particular town. This is the same town we were able to visit earlier last week. At least 8 people died in those strikes overnight. And another hospital, believe it or not, in Kafar al-Buda called Maryam Hospital, which is an obstetrics gynecology hospital that had at least 50 employees, including 7 doctors and 20 nurses. It's completely out of service now, cutting lots of vulnerable people off of critical medical care, especially women and newborn children. So the ceasefire that was reported over the weekend has not held up. That's why this morning the Turkish Defense Minister Hulusi Akar, he spoke to the Russian Defense Minister Shoigu, and they said that they were going to take special measures to make sure that a de-escalation zone stands in Idlib, but it's still not clear what those measures are exactly.
Okay, and Obaida, how much of a difference is there between who they claim to be hitting and who has been actually hit?
We drove at least 100 kilometers south of the Turkish border into Idlib province last week. And along the way, we crossed through a number of military checkpoints, opposition military checkpoints, past opposition military headquarters. These places were not being targeted. The soldiers that were manning these checkpoints were barricaded in, but they were obviously not expecting any kinds of airstrikes anytime soon. The traffic on these main roads that we were traveling along was still going. However, the places where civilians were under attack, we saw with our own eyes Russian jets come and attack a civil defense white helmet center. And this place, the particular location we were in Syria called Kafar al-Buda, is filled with civilians. These were not frontline positions. There weren't any kind of militant factions to be seen. There was not a significant presence of guns or different kinds of heavy weapons in the streets. This was a civilian neighborhood, and this was a civilian target. We also had the chance to visit a hospital. We were planning to visit 2, but because the jets were flying above us, we weren't able to visit the second one. But the one hospital we did see, they tell us, was similar to the scene at the other hospital. Complete destruction. The hospital was multiple floors, at least 3 floors high. All 3 floors were completely destroyed, including the basement level. It was completely gutted from the inside. All of the equipment was covered in dust and rubble and twisted metal. It was completely out of service, and there was nothing that any of the doctors or nurses or hospital employees could do to salvage much of that hospital. And so it's very clear that Russia and the regime have been targeting critical civilian infrastructure. In the past 3 weeks of escalation, they've targeted schools, hospitals, civil defense white helmets facilities. These are all critical infrastructure that give a lifeline to the civilians who live in these areas. But because the regime in Russia have been making it a point to target these locations, civilians are thinking twice about staying where they are.
Right. Obaida Hitto, really good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us from the ground in Syria. Let's bring in our panel now. In the Turkish city of Gaziantep is Murat Aslan. He led the intelligence division within the Turkish Armed Forces and is now a security researcher at the think tank, the Seta Foundation. In Washington, D.C. is Bassam Barabandi, a former Syrian diplomat and founder of the opposition movement People Demand Change. And in London is journalist and Syrian analyst Danny Makki. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Murat Aslan, our correspondent on the ground, suggests that the evidence over the weekend shows that the ceasefire is not holding. Are you surprised by that?
Actually, I'm not surprised because if you count the number of attacks of Assad regime supported or backed by Russian armed forces, it's about 40 to 50. That means currently the ceasefire is just on the paper, but not aligned by the Assad regime, and for sure opposing parties in Idlib will respond that kind of attacks in the region. So there will be a kind of escalation of mutual attacks, despite there's an agreed de-escalation zone. So the current events indicate that there will be an escalation in the coming days.
Danny Makki, the Russian and Syrian regime offensive at this moment, whether the ceasefire is holding or not, has it been justified?
Well, I wouldn't say if it's been justified or not. There's definitely been a reason and a cause from their perspective to undertake this offensive. And the reasons for that are ultimately to seize as much ground as possible and to prevent attacks on different areas of government-held territory. I mean, I would actually argue with you because I wouldn't even say it's a proper offensive. I think it's a very limited attack on what is essentially a border area between government-held territory in Idlib. I would not go as far as saying it's a proper offensive.
What does it tell us?
I don't think there's a big end game.
That's interesting, Danny, because what does it tell us about the nature of this war if it's a minor offensive and 150,000 people are on the move, hundreds are dead? What does that tell us about this war?
I mean, it would definitely say that if there was a very big operation to retake the entire Idlib province in the future, it would have dire humanitarian circumstances and repercussions. And that's something which I think all countries involved would want to avoid at this particular moment. And at the moment, as you've said, I mean, there's already been a lot of humanitarian cost for this limited offensive, we could say. But for the time being, it's kind of slowed down and it's not going as quickly as I think Damascus and the Russians wanted it to go at the start. But there are going to be consequences, whatever pathway this takes.
Okay.
And I think it's better for all sides at the moment to reach an agreement rather than have a few minor pieces of conquest gained by military warfare.
Bassam Barabandi, let's try and get into the minds of Assad and Putin and others conducting this offensive, right? They look at Hayat Tahrir Sham, former Jabhat al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda linked. They see them as clear terrorists. Their partners in agreement, such as Turkey and others, say these are clear terrorists as well. So from their perspective, why not go after these guys and take them out?
They need more the lands. They need more to conquer the lands. I don't agree with Danny. It's not small operation. It's literally large operation. They have been killing, destroying hospitals, schools, all infrastructure, civil infrastructures. They wanted just to kick all the people out of these areas so it will be empty for them and easy for them to take control out of it. Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS, are terrorist group. The only way, I think, to get them out is to empower the people of Idlib, the civilian in Idlib. They are capable and able to kick them out. Yet, due to the regime, Russian daily attacks and criminal attack that we saw in the last few days, they are giving more HTS the upper hand to say, look to the people of the locals, we are defending you. And that makes Turkey in very difficult positions. It makes the Syrian people in very difficult positions. They didn't attack any position of HTS. The only attacks, it's documented, it's school, hospitals, infrastructures, houses, even IDPs camps. And that makes difficult situation for everyone.
Is that deliberate, right? Is that possibly because...
It's 100%.
I mean, maybe
deliberate.
they're just incompetent. Maybe they're just incompetent. They're trying to bomb HTS and they're missing.
That could be, just in case there's all the international humanitarian group who working in Idlib or who used to work in Idlib. They gave all the coordinate of hospitals and the schools and humanitarian facilities to the UN to tell the Russian, this is hospitals, this is schools, this infrastructure. We as international NGOs, we are there. We know it's pure humanitarian. And the Russians exactly use that coordinate to attack these hospitals. So they know what they are doing. They want this area free of people. So they are putting more pressure on Turkey on a humanitarian level, on refugees, IDPs, and they are benefiting HTS. All this, it's empower HTS rather than weakening HTS.
Okay, so Murat Aslan, if you go back to your former position, if you were in your former position and you were analyzing this, would you consider that the Russians are doing this deliberately, and the Assad regime, that they're deliberately bombing hospitals and medical centers. 19, as far as I understand, have been destroyed or disabled in the past 20 days. Would they actually nefariously, deliberately be doing this?
Well, it's a tough question, but every act creates a reaction. If Russians or Assad regime attacks any targets in Idlib, that means there will be a response. We know that the problem is not about the presence of HTS or some other groups in the region, but the location of Idlib, because Idlib is just in the middle of Hama, Latakia, and Aleppo. Then all the roads are just meet each other in Idlib, and that's a threat for the military presence of Russia at the east of Mediterranean Sea, and also Assad regime's line of transportations or communications. Then Russia and Assad regime wants to push all the opposing elements in Idlib to push back, and including civilians. That's the issue. And Turkey is concerned with humanitarian aspect of this problem, because if these individuals, population, and they are immigrated here from East Ghouta, Aleppo, and some other parts at the south of Sham, as you know, then they will forced to evacuate the region one more time. So social consequences, then Turkey is capable of managing another humanitarian disaster in the region? I believe no, because we are currently hosting about 6 million immigrants, and we will add maybe another million, and that's not manageable. That's the issue.
Right. Danny Makki, given what the Assad regime and the Russians have been doing, would it be reasonable for Turkey to walk away from the deal now and say you guys aren't holding up your end?
Well, Turkey absolutely could walk away from the deal, but it would have no effect. And I think it would be unwise for Turkey to do that as well. I don't think they have any interest in walking away from what is essentially a partnership over Idlib with the biggest power broker in the country, and that's Russia, because I think that Turkey wants some sort of negotiated settlement for Idlib, because there has to be. You can't just have lawlessness and chaos and just a military offensive ongoing without an end game. And Russia definitely provides Turkey with a partner in some sense if they wanted to negotiate some sort of settlement towards redrawing out lines or finding some sort of proper ceasefire. I mean, the Russians and Assad did have a ceasefire, and this was yesterday, but it's ultimately a ploy. It's nothing significant or something which would stop all fighting or even some of the air attacks. And you've got to remember that Russia has really bought on with this Idlib operation. It's the one mainly pummeling different parts of Idlib from the sky. So this isn't just the Syrian government acting alone. Russia definitely has aims, it has intentions, and it has an agenda from this Idlib operation. But what I would like to say is, you've got potentially over 60, 70,000 different militants in Idlib, ranging from your extremist Al-Qaedas to less extreme groups to just Syrian rebels, who are standard and don't have that extreme kind of extremist ideology. So you've got a big mix there, and it's difficult for anyone to actually say, okay, what particular group is working in what particular area, especially when you have Hayat Tahrir al-Sham working in several different areas of Idlib. But to take Idlib would take a very long time. Okay. That's why I doubt the fact that it's a large offensive. If it was this large, then they wouldn't have had some sort of ceasefire over the last couple of days. The offensive, if you've noticed on the ground, has actually come to a relative standstill in some of the areas. Right. So Idlib, in the long run, it's going to take a long time to take back militarily, for sure.
Bassam Barabandi, to that point, that there are between 60 and 70,000 men with guns, right? Militants, rebels, whatever you want to call them. And among them, those clearly labeled Al-Qaeda, those who are less spiky and less dangerous or less terrorist according to definitions, right? How is it possible to differentiate among these groups? Is it possible?
No, I will back to the first point Danny mentioned. Turkey needs Russia. Russia needs Turkey, not the opposite. Turkey has heavy role to play in Syria. They are controlling or influencing large part of Syria. Russia without Turkey cannot have any peace process or any political process, whatever you call it. So Turkey have an upper hand. And I think here where Turkey can play a major role to stop Russians from attacking the civilian the way they have been doing for the last few days. As for the second question, I don't know where the 70,000 number coming from. We don't know. Nobody knows, I think, what the number are. There's terrorist
Okay,
group,
let's ask
HTS
Danny, where's the number
there's
from?
no doubt about it.
Danny, where's the number from?
I mean, some numbers even say up to 100,000. I mean, we're giving you a very moderate estimate in terms of 50 to 60,000. If you take just the militants who've been sent to Idlib from other areas of Syria, you've got about 20,000 alone. So obviously in Idlib there'd naturally be about 20 to 30,000. So we're speaking about a minimum of 50,000, just by logic.
Okay, Bassam?
I doubt the numbers, but here's not the issue. There's big problem. There's HTS terrorist group. It's in Idlib. They control a big large of the geography over there. There's no question about it. What is Russia and the regime are doing doesn't solve the problem at all. It makes it much worse. Turkey have a major role to play, and I think they should stand very tough on Russians on Idlib. They cannot just keep silent. Russia needs Turkey, and Turkey should have influenced its position with Russia to save these civilians. Killing or getting rid of the HTS, it cannot be done without the locals. The locals, they know who are the terrorists, and they need some kind of stability of time. We need 2 years of stability, and these locals will be able to kick this HTS out. The more you attack the locals, the more you are empowering HTS. This is the equation that Assad has played from day one. And then he was in Harasta and one in Ghouta, and he knows exactly how this worked out, how the regime destroyed all the civilian infrastructures and push all these people out, and only people who stay are the extremists, and they use that attack to get more legitimacy, which they don't have it. So I think the way forward, Russia and the regime should back up. They should back to the position where they were 10 days ago, and should be empowered more the civil societies, more humanitarian aid for the people, and they ask the people, people, empower the local people to work with the international community, with Turkey, even with Russia, to take HTS out.
Okay,
not the other way out.
Murat Aslan, if Bassam is right and Russia needs Turkey more than Turkey needs Russia, what should Ankara be doing right now?
Well, first, in Syrian conflict, there is no equity that any mathematics formula can explain, can address. But there are some wise options, in my belief, that Turkey can easily persuade actors in Idlib, but Russia first stop a regime. Because the ultimate aim of regime is to have all ethnic communities in Idlib evacuate the region, just to purify it. That first regime, backed by Russia, should stop any kind of aggression. Because once any aggression starts, that means we will have more radicalization in the region. And second thing, there will be a response for that. And the second thing, the wise option is to communicate. Because if you start communication by means of intelligence organizations, by means of irregular methodologies, then you can reach people and you can compromise. And what we see is that currently the issue, regime and Russia, is just pushing the other side in favor of themselves. But if there is only a small probability to harm civilians, then they must stop. And that's the issue, nowadays.
Danny Makki, are they trying to change the demographics of the region, as has been suggested, the regime? Is that what they want to do?
I think it would be very difficult to change any demographics, especially in Idlib, where you have almost a large percentage of the population is ethnically Sunni. There'd be no way of actually changing that. I mean, even the changing of the demographics is something which is pretty overstated. I mean, there's more immediate political short-term gain than demographics. And one thing you could easily point to is the fact that a main reason why this operation has started, from the government perspective, from the Russian-backed perspective, is that a lot of the areas, especially in northern Hama, which have a lot of pro-government towns and villages, have been under mortar attack for a long period of time. That's one of the main reasons why people within government-held areas have pushed the army to at least create some sort of barrier between them and opposition-held Idlib. Now, I don't think that this is set in stone. I think that it's quite simple to come to some sort of agreement over Idlib. You know, this operation is not going to continue until they reach Idlib city. And before convincing Assad or convincing the Syrian government, you'd have to convince the Russians, because it's the Russians who have had the fiercest tone on Idlib since probably about a year. And I'm sure that you've been following the situation and the remarks and the statements of Lavrov and Putin over the Idlib situation. It's definitely been building up as a pressure cooker for quite some time. And the Russians have been targeting all of the groups, not just Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. So I think Turkey has room for maneuver when it comes to Russia, and ultimately this will pan out in some sort of agreement at some point. I don't think this will happen immediately, but I think definitely down the road that is one potential exit strategy for saving Idlib from what could be quite a big onslaught.
Makki, Bassam Barabandi and Murat Aslan, I'm out of time, but I thank you all for joining us on the Newsmakers.